A marriage of convenience. The church bells rang across Boston's historic district as Natalie Brooks walked down the aisle in a dress that cost more than her entire college education. White roses lined every pew, their sweet scent mixing with the smell of old wood and candle wax. She kept her eyes forward, refusing to look at the guests who had come to witness this transaction disguised as a wedding. James Whitmore stood at the altar. Tall and composed in his tailored black suit, at 32, he was the youngest CEO in his family's shipping empire, known for his sharp business mind and even sharper negotiating skills. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his jaw set in a line that suggested this was just another business meeting for him. Natalie's mother had explained it simply 3 months ago. The Brooks family publishing house was drowning in debt. The Whitmores needed respectability and connections in the media world. A marriage would solve both problems. Natalie, at 26, had no choice but to agree. Her stepfather, Richard Brooks, had made sure of that. The ceremony passed in a blur. Natalie repeated words that felt hollow in her mouth. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, James leaned in and kissed her cheek, not her lips. It was a gesture that might have looked tender to the crowd, but felt like exactly what it was: polite distance. The ride to Whitmore Estate, the limousine that took them to the Whitmore Estate, was silent, except for the soft hum of the engine. Natalie sat as far from James as the seat would allow, her wedding dress pooling around her like a white fortress. She could feel his eyes on her occasionally, but she kept her gaze fixed on the window, watching Boston's streets turn into the tree-lined roads of the suburbs. "Are you comfortable?" James asked finally, his voice breaking the silence. "Yes, thank you," Natalie replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you need anything, just ask. The staff has been instructed to treat you as the lady of the house." Natalie nodded, still not looking at him. The words were kind, but they felt rehearsed, like lines from a script he had memorized for this role. When they arrived at the estate, Natalie had to suppress a gasp. The Whitmore mansion was enormous. A 3-story colonial with white columns and perfectly manicured gardens that seemed to stretch forever. It was beautiful and intimidating in equal measure. Her new prison housekeeper named Dorothy showed Natalie to her room. Not their room. Her room. The relief she felt was so intense it almost made her dizzy. "Mr. Whitmore's quarters are down the hall," Dorothy explained with a kind smile. "He wanted you to have your own space. Said you should feel comfortable here." The room was larger than Natalie's entire apartment had been. A 4-poster bed dominated the center, covered in cream-colored silk. French doors opened onto a balcony overlooking the gardens. Everything was elegant and expensive and cold. After Dorothy left, Natalie stood in front of the full-length mirror and began the painful process of removing her wedding dress. Her hands shook as she worked the buttons, and she had to stop several times to steady herself. The dress finally fell away, leaving her in the ivory slip she wore underneath. She caught sight of herself in the mirror and immediately looked away. Even through the slip, she could see the faint lines crossing her back and shoulders. Scars from years of her stepfather's belt. From his fits of rage when she didn't meet his impossible standards. From the time she tried to protect her younger sister. The knock on the door. Natalie was brushing her hair when she heard the soft knock. Her heart jumped into her throat. "Natalie?" James's voice came through the door. "May I come in?" She wanted to say no. She wanted to lock the door and hide. But she was his wife now, and wives had duties. Everyone had made that very clear. "Yes," she managed to say. The door opened, and James entered. He had changed from his wedding suit into casual clothes, dark pants, and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked different like this. Less formal, almost human. "I wanted to talk," he said, staying near the door. "About expectations." Natalie set down her brush, her hands gripping the edge of the vanity. "I understand what's expected of me. Do you?" James took a step closer, and Natalie tensed. "Because I don't think we've actually discussed anything." He moved across the room slowly, deliberately, giving her time to tell him to stop. When he reached her, he didn't touch her. Instead, he pulled up a chair and sat down, putting himself at eye level. "I know this marriage wasn't your choice," James said quietly. "It wasn't mine either. But we're in this now, and I think we should at least try to make it bearable. Bearable, Natalie repeated. The word stung more than it should have. I'm not good at this, James admitted, running a hand through his hair. At personal relationships. But I want you to know that I'm not going to force you into anything. You have my word. The moment everything changed, Natalie turned to look at him, searching his face for signs of deception. But all she saw was sincerity in something that looked like exhaustion. As if this day had been as difficult for him as it had been for her. Why are you being kind to me? She asked. Because you look terrified, James said simply. And I recognized that look. Before Natalie could respond, she stood up too quickly. The thin robe she had thrown over her slip caught on the chair and slipped off one shoulder. She grabbed for it, but not before James saw. His eyes went to her exposed shoulder, to the pale scars that crisscrossed her skin. Natalie watched his expression change from confusion to understanding to something that looked like rage. Who did that to you? His voice was low and tight. Natalie pulled the robe back up with shaking hands. Please don't look. But James was already standing, his hands clenched at his sides. Who hurt you? It doesn't matter, Natalie whispered, tears burning her eyes. It's over now. The hell it doesn't matter. James took a step toward her, then stopped, clearly fighting to control himself. Natalie, who did this? She shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. The shame was overwhelming, crushing, making it hard to breathe. James seemed to realize he was making it worse. He took a deep breath and visibly forced himself to calm down. When he spoke again, his voice was gentler. You don't have to tell me right now, he said. But I want you to know something. I promise you, on my life, that no one will ever hurt you again. Not while I'm here. Natalie looked up at him through her tears. There was something in his eyes she hadn't expected to see. Protection, determination, and underneath it all, a pain that suggested he understood more than she realized. Why do you care? She whispered. James hesitated, then reached out slowly. When Natalie didn't pull away, he gently brushed a tear from her cheek. Because I know what it's like to be hurt by someone who was supposed to protect you, he said quietly. And I swore I would never let that happen to anyone else if I had the power to stop it. In that moment, something shifted between them. The wall Natalie had built around herself, the one that kept everyone at a safe distance, developed its first crack. And for the first time since she had agreed to this marriage, she felt something other than fear. She felt hope. Morning light and new beginnings. Natalie woke to sunlight streaming through the curtains, warming her face. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back. The wedding. The scars. James's promise. She sat up slowly, her body tensed with uncertainty. What would this morning bring? Would James pretend nothing had happened? Would he demand answers she wasn't ready to give? A soft knock on the door made her jump. Natalie? I brought coffee. James's voice was tentative, careful. She pulled on her robe, making sure it was securely tied before answering. Come in. James entered, carrying a tray with 2 steaming cups and a plate of pastries. He was dressed casually in jeans and a navy sweater, his hair still damp from a shower. He looked younger like this, less like the powerful businessman and more like an ordinary person. I didn't know how you take it, he said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. So I brought cream and sugar. Black is fine, Natalie said, joining him at the table. They sat in awkward silence for a moment, both cradling their cups. Finally, James spoke. I owe you an apology for last night. I pushed too hard. Your past is yours to share when and if you're ready. Natalie looked at him over the rim of her cup. You said you understood? About being hurt by someone who was supposed to protect you. James set down his cup, his jaw tightening. My father, Robert Whitmore. To the world, he was a brilliant businessman and philanthropist. At home, he was a tyrant. Shared wounds, Natalie listened as James told her about growing up in the Whitmore mansion. About a father who believed emotion was weakness and mistakes were unforgivable. About punishments that left no physical marks but carved deep wounds in other ways. Isolation, public humiliation, the systematic destruction of anything James cared about. "He never hit me," James said, staring out the window. "But there are other ways to break a person." He was a master at finding exactly what would hurt most. "My stepfather used his fists," Natalie heard herself say. The words came out before she could stop them. "Richard Brooks. He married my mother when I was 12. At first, he seemed perfect, charming, successful. Then the mask came off." James turned to look at her, his eyes filled with understanding but not pity. "That made it easier to continue. Started with criticism. Nothing I did was good enough. Then it escalated. A slap here, a shove there. By the time I was 15, I had learned to stay out of his way, to make myself invisible. But sometimes that wasn't enough. Your mother?" James asked quietly. She saw what she wanted to see. The successful husband, the big house, the social standing. I think part of her knew, but acknowledging it would mean giving up everything she had gained. An unexpected alliance over the next few weeks. Something unexpected happened. Natalie and James began to talk. Real conversations, not the polite small talk of strangers. They had breakfast together each morning, sharing coffee and stories. They walked through the gardens in the evening, discussing books and dreams and the weight of family expectations. James never pushed her to share more than she was ready to give, and Natalie found herself opening up in ways she never had before. There was something healing about being heard, truly heard by someone who understood. One afternoon, Natalie was reading in the library when James found her. "There's a charity gala next week," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "benefiting children's literacy programs. I have to go, and I'd like you to come with me. But if you're not ready for that kind of public appearance, I understand." Natalie considered. The thought of getting dressed up and facing Boston's social elite was daunting. But staying hidden forever wasn't the answer either. "I'll go," she said. "But I need to tell you something first. Richard will be there. He sits on the board of the Literacy Foundation." James's expression hardened. "Then he'll see that you're not his to control anymore." The night of the gala, Natalie wore a deep emerald dress that James had insisted on buying for her. It had long sleeves that covered her scars and a neckline that was elegant without being revealing. She felt beautiful for the first time in years. James looked stunning in his black tuxedo. But it was the way he looked at her that made Natalie's heart race, like she was something precious. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm. "As I'll ever be." The ballroom was magnificent, all crystal chandeliers and flowing champagne. Natalie stayed close to James as they made their way through the crowd, smiling politely at the people who came to congratulate them on their marriage. Then she saw him. Richard Brooks stood near the bar, holding court with a group of businessmen. He was 55, but looked younger, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit tailored to perfection. To anyone watching, he looked like the epitome of success and respectability. Natalie felt her body go rigid. James must have felt it too, because his hand covered hers on his arm, warm and steady. "We don't have to go over there," he murmured. "Yes, we do," Natalie said, surprising herself. "I can't avoid him forever." They approached the group, and Richard turned, his smile not reaching his cold eyes.
"Natalie."
"How lovely to see you. And this must be your new husband." Richard extended his hand to James. "Congratulations. You've acquired quite an asset." "I raised her well." The words were calculated, designed to diminish her, to remind her of her place. Natalie felt the old fear trying to rise up, the instinct to shrink away and disappear. But then James spoke. "Actually, Mr. Brooks," Natalie raised herself. "Despite considerable obstacles, from what I understand." Richard's smile faltered. "I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you know exactly what I mean," James said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. "And I want to make something very clear. Natalie is my wife. She's under my protection now, and I protect what's mine very seriously." Standing her ground, the tension in the air was thick enough to cut. The other men in the group shifted uncomfortably, sensing conflict, but not understanding its source. "Perhaps we should discuss this another time," Richard said through gritted teeth. "No," Natalie said. Her voice was quiet but clear. We'll discuss it now." Everyone turned to look at her. Richard's eyes narrowed dangerously, and Natalie saw the flash of rage he always showed right before he struck. But he couldn't strike her here, not in front of witnesses. Not in front of her powerful new husband. "You have nothing to say to me?" "Girl," Richard hissed,
I like it.
feeling strength flow through her with each word. "You hurt me for years. You made me believe I was worthless, that I deserved the pain. But I didn't. I was a child, and you were a monster." Richard's face went red. "How dare you speak to me this way? How dare you raise your hand to someone who couldn't fight back?" James interrupted, stepping slightly in front of Natalie. "Gentlemen, I think you should know that Richard Brooks has a history of violence toward his family members. It's something the board might want to consider when evaluating his position." The other men looked shocked. One of them, an elderly gentleman Natalie recognized as the foundation's chairman, frowned deeply. "Is this true, Richard?" he asked. "Of course not. The girl is delusional, probably unstable. You know how women can be?" "I have scars," Natalie said clearly. "Medical records from 3 separate hospital visits, and a younger sister who will testify if needed." She hadn't planned to say that, hadn't thought through the implications. But the look on Richard's face, the panic mixed with fury, told her she had hit her mark. "This is slander," Richard sputtered. "I'll sue you for everything you have." "Go ahead, James," said calmly. "My lawyers are excellent, and I have resources you can't imagine. Test me if you want, Brooks. See what happens." "Ah!" Richard looked between them, clearly calculating his options. Finally, he turned and walked away without another word. His shoulders rigid with barely contained rage, Natalie started to shake as the adrenaline left her body. James immediately put his arm around her waist, supporting her. "I need air," she whispered. He guided her through the crowd and out onto a balcony overlooking the city. The cool night air felt wonderful against her flushed skin. "You were incredible," James said softly. "I was terrified," Natalie admitted.
Act.
Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. He turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I'm proud of you." Natalie looked up at him, at this man who had started as a stranger and was becoming something else entirely. "Something important. Thank you for standing with me," she said. "Always," James replied. And then he did something that surprised them both. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't like the polite peck at their wedding. This was real and warm and full of promise. Natalie felt something inside her chest crack open, letting in light she hadn't known she needed. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "Was that okay?" James asked, suddenly uncertain. "More than okay," Natalie whispered, touching her lips. "It was perfect." Finding her voice, the weeks following the gala brought changes that Natalie could never have anticipated. Richard Brooks had quietly resigned from the Literacy Foundation board, citing health concerns. The truth was, 3 other families had come forward with similar stories after Natalie's public confrontation. The facade he had built so carefully was crumbling. Natalie should have felt victorious, but mostly she felt exhausted. Healing, she was learning, wasn't a straight line. Some days she felt strong and capable. Other days, a loud noise or sudden movement would send her right back to being that terrified girl. Hiding in her room, James was patient through it all. He suggested therapy, and Natalie agreed, meeting twice a week with Dr. Patricia Hammond, a specialist in trauma recovery. Slowly, painfully, she began to unpack years of hurt, but it was her involvement with the Children's Advocacy Center that truly transformed her. James had mentioned the organization casually one morning over coffee, noting that they were looking for volunteers. Natalie had felt called to it immediately, making a difference. Center provided support for children who had experienced abuse, offering therapy, legal assistance, and a safe space to heal. Natalie started by answering phones and filing paperwork. But the director, a warm woman named Gloria Jenkins, quickly recognized that Natalie had more to offer. "You understand these kids," Gloria said one afternoon. "Not theoretically. You've lived it. That matters." Natalie began sitting in on therapy sessions, just observing at first. Then Gloria asked her to share her story with a 15-year-old girl named Beth, who refused to speak about her father's abuse. Sitting across from Beth, seeing her own pain reflected in another person's eyes, Natalie found words she hadn't known she possessed. "Wasn't your fault," she told Beth quietly. "Whatever happened, however he made you feel, it wasn't your fault. And staying silent doesn't protect you. It protects him." Beth had started crying then, and so had Natalie. But it was the beginning of Beth's healing and a deepening of Natalie's own. James supported her work completely, even joining her at center fundraisers and using his business connections to increase donations. Watching him play basketball with a group of kids one Saturday afternoon, laughing and completely at ease, Natalie felt her heart swell with something she was finally ready to name: love. A crisis 3 months after their wedding, James came home late one evening, looking shaken. Natalie was in the library, reviewing case files from the center. When she heard the front door slam, she found him in his study, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring at nothing. "James, what's wrong?" He looked up, and she saw anguish in his eyes. "My father. He's sick. Cancer. Stage 4. Natalie crossed the room and sat beside him. "I'm sorry, I'm not," James said bitterly. "Isn't that terrible? The man is dying, and all I feel is anger for everything he took from me." "That's not terrible. That's human." James set down his glass and ran both hands through his hair. "He wants to see me. Says he wants to make peace before he dies. Will you go?" "I don't know." He looked at her, vulnerability written across his face. "What would you do?" Natalie thought about Richard, about the years of pain he had caused. "I think I would go. Not for him, but for myself. So I could say everything I needed to say and walk away knowing I didn't leave anything unsaid." Facing the past, James went to see his father the next day, and Natalie insisted on going with him. Robert Whitmore was in a private room at Massachusetts General Hospital, hooked up to various machines. His once powerful frame, now frail and diminished, he looked up when they entered, his eyes still sharp despite his condition. Moving from James to Natalie. "So you brought your wife?" "The Brooks girl. Her name is Natalie," James said coldly. "And yes, she's here because I asked her to be." Robert's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "You always were stubborn." "Got that from me." "I got a lot from you," James said, moving closer to the bed. "Most of it I've spent my adult life trying to unlearn." "Is that what this is?" "You've come to tell a dying man what a failure he was as a father." "No," James said, his voice steady. "I came to tell you that, despite everything you did, despite every way you tried to break me, I survived. I built a life. I found someone who sees the good in me that you never could, and I'm going to be happy in spite of you." Robert was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't know how to be soft. My father wasn't soft. In our world, softness gets you destroyed." "In our world, being human gets you labeled weak," James corrected. "But you know what? I'd rather be weak and human than strong and monstrous." Natalie watched tears slide down Robert's weathered cheeks. "I'm sorry," the old man whispered. "For what it's worth, I am sorry." "It's worth something," James said quietly. "Not everything, but something." They left shortly after. In the car, James was silent, staring out the window. "Are you okay?" Natalie asked. "I will be," he said, reaching for her hand. "Because I have you." Building something real that night, lying in bed together, in what had become their shared room. James and Natalie talked about the future, about the family they might build, about breaking cycles of pain, about creating something better than what they had known. "I love you," James said suddenly. "I don't know when it happened exactly. Maybe that first night when I saw your scars and wanted to destroy whoever had hurt you. Maybe the morning we had coffee and you laughed at my terrible jokes. But I love you, Natalie, completely." Natalie felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were good tears this time. Healing tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "You gave me back myself. You showed me that love doesn't have to hurt." James kissed her then, slow and deep and filled with promise, and Natalie kissed him back, pouring into it everything she felt, everything she hoped for, everything they could be together. 6 months later, The Children's Advocacy Center was hosting its annual gala, and Natalie stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd of donors and supporters. James sat in the front row, his eyes full of pride and love. "My name is Natalie Whitmore," she began, her voice strong and clear. "And I'm a survivor of childhood abuse." She told her story. Not all of it, but enough. She talked about the shame and the fear and the long road to healing. She talked about finding unexpected love in an arranged marriage. And she talked about the importance of giving children a voice when the adults in their lives tried to silence them. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. But the only approval she cared about came from the man in the front row, who stood and smiled at her with such love that it took her breath away. Later that night, back at home, they stood on the balcony of their bedroom, looking out at the stars. "Do you ever regret it?" Natalie asked. "The way we started? The arrangement?" James pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Not for a second. Sometimes the best things come from the places we least expect them. I was so scared that first night," Natalie admitted. "I thought I was walking into another prison, and instead, I found home," Natalie said, turning in his arms to face him. "I found you." James kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips. "We found each other. Two broken people who learned to be whole together." "Not broken," Natalie corrected softly. "Healing. We're healing together." "Even better," James agreed. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, under the stars. Two survivors who had chosen to love instead of fear, to hope instead of despair, to build instead of destroy. Their marriage had begun as a business arrangement, a convenient solution to complicated problems, but it had become something neither of them had dared to dream of. It had become real. It had become theirs. And in the quiet of that perfect moment, Natalie knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever scars from the past still needed healing, they would face it together. Not because they had to, but because they chose to, because that was what love was. A choice made over and over, every single day, and they chose each other.